Awesome. Hooray for so many people. Awesome. We'll get started in just a second. For those of you just joining us, take a second to digest what's on the screen, if you will. It should make your viewing experience just a little bit more smooth. If you got our pre-event email, most of these things were covered there as well. So pretty basic stuff. I am Claire. I'm the Director of Marketing at Atlantic, and I'm so excited that you're all here with us today. I'll let Neil and David introduce themselves. I don't think I have to do those honors, but just before we start, just a few things logistically. We're going to be together for about 45 minutes to an hour. So we'll get you out of here by 5 p.m. Eastern time. If you have any technical difficulties along the way, feel free to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to ask us any technical questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer those. We'll also be using the Q&A this time to ask David some questions. So if you have questions during the session, enter those in there. We'll wait and actually take those questions towards the end of the hour that we're spending together. But if something strikes your fancy in the moment and you want to make sure that that question gets asked, feel free to enter it in and we'll come back to it a little bit later. Lastly, as you know, these sorts of live events are very much dependent on the internet, and we have only so much that we can do to control the internet. So if anything goes a little bit funky, we'll do our best to solve it in the moment, but hopefully, knock on wood, all will be smooth, and then we'll send you off into the weekend. And I think that's it. Just thank you for being along for the ride. So Neil, you go ahead and take it from here.
Great, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. For those of you who don't know, I'm Neil Pepe. I'm the Artistic Director of The Atlantic, and this is Live with The Atlantic, which is our virtual programming series we've created during the strange times in which we live. And this is our first installment of something we're calling Composer's Corner, and we couldn't be more happy to be inviting our old friend, David Yazbeck, to join us. Before I bring Mr. Yazbeck into the conversation, I just wanted to say, again, thank you all for supporting Atlantic. As a sort of side note, we've been hard at work kind of generating plans to produce again. Obviously, we're hoping to get back to live theater as soon as we can and as soon as it's safe for everyone, artists, audience, staff, to return. We're eager to gather again in the theater to see everybody live. We have faith, theater will be back, and we're thinking about creative ways to bring it back as soon as possible. In the meantime, we're relying on generosity and support from our friends to keep us afloat. So we've been doing lots of this free programming. If you feel inclined to make a donation, we would be so grateful. It will help us survive in these difficult times. I think there's a donate button somewhere, or Claire can tell you later how that happens. David Yazbeck. I was thinking this morning, he's a quadruple threat. He's a writer, musician, composer, lyricist. I'm just going to briefly go over some of the extraordinary things he's done. 5 musicals, The Full Monty, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Women on the Verge, The Band's Visit, Tootsie. I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones I wanted to list. Atlantic has a long history with Yazbeck. He did music for the Howard Quarter play, our first big success, called Boy's Life in 1988 at Lincoln Center. He did music for a Jez Butterworth play that I directed called Mojo in 1998. He did music for another Howard Quarter play, Sea of Tranquility. He started early on as a writer on the David Letterman Show. He won an Emmy for that. He has a number of great rock albums out. He wrote the theme song, for those of you, I love this song, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? He's produced a variety of great artists, including XTC, Tito Puente, The Persuasions. And he's just an amazing theater person, an amazing composer, and a great friend of Atlantic. So welcome, David. We're happy to have you.
Well, Neil, thank you. It's been, we've known each other for so long. When you say our old friend, it's pretty literal.
But we look good. We're doing okay. Hey, so I wanted to start because I don't even know the answer to this question. How, going way back, how did you first get interested in music? How did you start getting interested in being a musician, and then also wanting to segue sort of in music and theater, because the two seem to have come together. But give me a little bit about the early days.
Well, I've always considered myself a musician first. The early days for me started when I was, probably 2 days old or something. Sound has always been my main sense, and everything comes through the ears first. I do believe that the reason I'm so nearsighted is because I my brain takes up the hearing takes up more space in my brain. My mother was a really good pianist, and my parents listened to music a lot. But the talent that I think I was born with was sort of a curiosity about sounds and about music, and I was hungry for new sounds and new music since I was a small kid, growing up on the Upper West Side of New York in a building where there were flamenco dancers in one apartment. There were singing teachers in another. My piano teacher lived one flight below me. You go out to Central Park and there's, Afro-Cuban combos just playing on the benches. My parents took me to see Miles Davis when I was like 12, and that was like the Bitches Brew period. In a Silent Way, after In a Silent Way, there was just a lot of music coming in, and I was really interested in all of it.
And you were already studying piano from an early age. You were already studying piano from an early age?
I studied piano for 1 year when I was 7 years old. And then fast forward to when I was maybe 16, and I took 2 piano lessons, jazz piano lessons with Carol Kane's mother.
Awesome. That's great.
And she just taught me like 3 things that just completely sent me off in another direction as a piano player. And I took cello lessons for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so when I think when I first met you, so you went to Brown, right? And were you studying theater at Brown?
No, I was an English and American literature major.
But you got involved in the theater there and the music and did some music there too, or did you?
Yeah, I did a lot of music, and I think I had a minor in music. But I've always been involved in theater,
Yeah.
not just as a musician, but as a writer and sometimes as a performer. And at Brown, I got to do everything, including write a musical and be in plays and be in musicals and be in lots of bands. And it was a really fun time.
So that was a point where you were starting to kind of multitask, do theater stuff, do music stuff. Because when I first met David, I guess in the mid to late 80s, I always thought of you as a rock and roll musician. I mean, we talk about like you love Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart and all these other incredible influences, yet you were also, I don't know how much musical theater at that point you were writing in New York. I think you had just been writing with Letterman and you were playing with rock bands, right? So
Yeah.
at that point, were you thinking, oh, I'm going to be a TV writer and I'm going to be a rock and roll star?
I know it's a confusing biography. And so many people that I know who are in theater, that was their dream.
Yeah.
All their lives. When we met, I was still writing a lot of television. I think I had sold a screenplay, and I may have already been, it was a little after we met that I started writing stuff with Howard Corder.
Yeah.
For HBO and stuff like that. Howard Corder, the playwright who, an early Atlantic, also collaborator.
Yeah, wonderful playwright, great friend, yeah.
And I had a rock band. I had a record deal. And I think one of the things that sent me into musical theater, even though I had written music for a musical in college, was I just started getting really tired of the grind of being in a band and doing any kind of touring. And I was having a conversation with my friend Adam Gettle, who had done a beautiful musical called Floyd Collins off Broadway. I said, how do you do that? How do you do something where you can write songs and not have to perform them every night?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what started it. He pointed some people in my direction, and then I got the full Monty, and I sort of took to it. I was good at it, and I enjoyed it, and it's been my main thing for the last 20 years.
Well, yeah, it's funny to think of it because it's sort of knowing the different things you had been pursuing. It didn't seem like an accident. In other words, it felt like you were utilizing all these strengths you have and bringing them together, in that you were such a great writer, you were such a great musician, composer, and you also had a sort of great sense of humor. And it seems like all of those elements were able to come into play as you got into composing musical theater. Not to mention that thing, which is, from my perspective, a great thing to have with a composer, is you have a sense of story and dramaturgy. So it felt like all of those things could come to bear, which, and why don't we talk about your first musical, because you co-wrote that with Terrence McNally.
Yeah, that was a pretty good initial collaboration.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself a great writer. I mean, I think I'm a really good composer and a really good lyricist and a good writer, okay writer.
Yeah.
But I do understand structure and I do understand story. And that's a big deal. You really sort of have to be a dramatist to write multiple musicals and, that feel integrated. And I think the ones I've written with some great collaborators, all of them have been great, were really well integrated. The first experience, of course, was Terrence, and at one point Terrence even asked me, why don't you write your next musical and write the book too, because you're a writer? And I said, no, then it won't be as good, the book won't be as good, and B, I won't get to collaborate with a great writer like you. So that was the first one, and it was a great experience, and I really miss Terrence. We lost him. He was one of the first COVID-related, deaths. In the process of working with him, I learned an awful lot about structuring a musical. It was a really great experience. We had begun talking about and actually did a workshop for a revival of the Full Monty maybe 6 months ago. I just spoke to the man who was producing that, and maybe in a year or two we'll see that happen, and it'll be a real tribute to Terrence. And
such a terrible, tragic loss.
It was nice working with him again.
Yeah. And talk about, so not only the Full Monty, but a bunch of the other musicals that you've done were in fact adaptations of films. Is there a particular thing about that was a challenge, or what? Talk about that process. I mean, maybe it's a good thing because there's a structure that already existed, but talk about what that was and the trials and tribulations of adapting. Have they all been adaptations?
They've all been adapted from films.
Wow. Yeah.
Why films? It wasn't a choice. It just happened that way.
Yeah.
Most musicals are adaptations, and there's a good reason for it. It's because you have this very strong story foundation to build on. But in the case of my shows, many of them, I saw the movie and said, oh, that's a good movie. But I never said, that's a great fucking movie, except for maybe The Band's Visit. So there was this interesting, sort of extra challenge with all the other shows where you're saying, is there a way we can actually use any of the weaknesses of the movie in our favor? Are there any chinks in the armor that we can sort of expand upon or fill in and make the musical special in that way? I've worked on other shows that were not based on pre-existing stories, and man, it is a hard thing to do. Really hard. I'm working on a musical now that's sort of a bio musical, that I was telling you about a character whose career was more interesting after he died than before. I'm doing that with Itamar Moses, who I wrote Band's Visit with, and with Eric Della Penna, who plays in my band and who has his own band and who's a great songwriter. And the three of us are, it's taken us a long time to figure out how to tell the story because someone else hasn't figured out structurally,
Right.
Those bones.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're fortunate enough that you're going to play us a couple of songs. So before we get into that, for any sort of young composers out there, do you want to talk about, well, two questions really. One, sort of how you approach, when you're first starting to look at where songs should go, how you actually, how you define when you go, oh, this is a point where we should have a song. Any advice on your process in terms of the adaptation into a musical, or pointers about that, and advice to young composers who are trying to get into the business, and thoughts about, or pointers for them about things that were helpful to you?
Let me start with the second.
Okay, all right.
I always, at some point in anytime I give a master class,
Yeah.
there is a moment where I say the following, which is, you will be doing yourself a real favor if you spend the next 6 months to a year, let's say, not listening to any musical theater. So, my advice to young composers in the musical theater is stop listening to musical theater. Stop getting titillated by what you think is either the glamour or the little thrills that you get from from just the idea of being in musical theater. Stop getting titillated by the thrills you get from certain chord changes or melody tricks that you're hearing over and over again. Just listen to anything else and everything else because you can. When I was growing up, I used to go to the Lincoln Center Library and just listen to albums. I would put in at least, and this wasn't a chore, this was like something I looked forward to every week. I'd put in at least 2 or 3 hours every weekend doing that. Because they had public carols, they called them, like public, record players with headphones, and they had, whatever, 100,000 albums, or something.
You would just listen to a wide variety of music.
And everything. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, when I give that advice, I say, listen to Robert Johnson, listen to Delta blues, listen to every kind of blues, listen to every kind of rock music. But especially the Beatles and the Stones, those are, and XTC, I have my own favorites, but also dive down, hear what gets you. Like listen to early Miles, listen to early bebop, listen to Charlie Parker, then go and listen to Captain Beefheart and get out and see if it's just listen to stuff. If it doesn't take, it doesn't take. But don't listen to me, to my shows. Don't listen to Sondheim. Don't listen to Jason. Don't listen to anything. If you the only exception is you can listen to Guys and Dolls over and over again. That's the only exception.
And why is that?
Because it's so fucking great. But again, that's my personal opinion.
And I'm assuming part of the reason you're giving that advice is that by listening to such a broad spectrum of music, you start to discover yourself within that. You start to discover what your proclivities are, what you respond to, and then through that you discover your own voice.
Yeah, I don't exactly understand music.
Yeah.
I said, I'm about sound, kind of. Like I understand it. I'm not a great teacher because I don't really understand how to explain. And this gets to your first question. Yeah. I don't really know how to explain what it is that floats my boat when I hear something. But a lot of it has to do with taste. And if you can my mother always used to say, broaden your frame of reference, broaden your frame of reference. And of course I ignored it because it was my mother saying it. And yet I couldn't help doing that. So in retrospect, she was absolutely right. It also goes beyond sound and music. When we were working on the band's visit at Atlantic,
Yeah.
when I was writing it and rewriting it during rehearsals and then during previews, there was an exhibition going on at the Pace Gallery of Rothko, like this amazing exhibition for like a private space of Rothko paintings, and which I just completely, I'm on that wavelength, and it was perfect for the band's visit. And I went there almost every day and spent half an hour to an hour walking around and looking at these paintings. And they definitely had a major impact on the way I was writing. I'm not sure why, but there's something transcendent. Any transcendent art is going to help you make your art deeper.
That's great. That's great. And in a way, let's segue to, because I know you wanted to play something from Women on the Verge. You want to talk a little bit about Women on the Verge and that process, and how you got into that?
Well, thank you for asking me about that. I like talking about Women on the Verge because I think it's a really good show, and it didn't really present itself right on Broadway. The show was a much better show 2 weeks after we opened than it was the day we opened because we worked very hard. We ran out of time. That's all I can say. I mean,
Which is common, right?
At a certain time, and it was misjudged, and we just ran out of time and opened the show, and we just kept working on it, and it was really good, but it still wasn't good enough. The show ran with a great cast, wonderful performers, and it only ran for 4 months. I forget how many months. The cast album, though, got a lot of attention, and we spent a lot of time that next summer working on making the show, just Jeffrey Lane and I. Jeffrey Lane had already written a really great book, but because of production problems, he wasn't able to have the time to work it right. So we spent a lot of time talking about, with Bart Scher, the director, talking about, what if we do this? What about this? We made a better show, and we got a call from London to do it on the West End, and we did, and we did workshops, we rehearsed, I wrote some new songs, Jeffrey totally revamped the book, and it was great in London, and it was a hit, and it is great, and there's a video of it that I'd love to be able to share, but I can't. I don't know who owns the rights to it. Anyway, It exists as a great show, and I look forward to a chance to have it seen again in the United States.
Yeah, well, we look forward to seeing it again. Tell us about the song you're going to play from it.
It's the opening number. It was in both productions, but in the London production, the narrative character, who was a cab driver, was also happened to be this amazing fado singer, like a flamenco sounding singer. He's really like a rock singer, but he also has this. He's from Portugal and has this capacity, and he was also a great guitar player. So we had him playing it also. Anyway, it's sort of introductory, and it's just about the city that Pedro Almodovar, has set most of his movies in, and it was his kind of, the city was the love of his life for a long time. And that's what it is. It's called Madrid.
Great.
Shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
Nuts.
Let me apologize in advance for the fact that it's one microphone and it's over there.
some mama milk and not a drop is wasted. Give me direction straight into the hurricane. Shake me up and take me to the heart of all the joy and all the pain. Put me to bed, I'm tattered up and torn. But every morning I come out and I'm reborn, reborn, reborn. My mama tree, I'm your baby. Bounce me in my buggy on the roads, I'm born to bump on. I'm alright, or maybe I'm all wrong, but I'm taking this ride and anyone can jump on. And when the trail gets stale, the same old view, just turn the corner and it's all brand new. But gee, I love you, my big mama. Give me a little titty cause I'm hungry every minute. Technicolor, the widescreen cinerama. Life is a movie and oh God, I'm glad I'm in it. Well, I've been down every street and every cul-de-sac, ever-changing cast of thousands in the back. The flag goes down, a brand new scene in there. The flag goes up, the scene is over. They get out, it all begins again. Retrieve my mama, my creator. She might make me crazy, but I'm not gonna fight her. I love her madly, even when I hate her. Push me out, I'll just crawl back up inside her. So if you wanna go ahead and die, amen. In another 10 minutes you'll be born again. And it'll all be here, it'll all be new. And what you're gonna do with it is up to you. But maybe life is hard, maybe love is fickle. It's all a steady trickle from her umbilical. Every bump on the road, every stop, every start. You can feel the heart, you can feel the heart, you can feel the heart. Bada boom, bada boom, bada boom. Ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma.
Awesome.
Oi.
Yay. Fantastic. I have two questions regarding this. What a fantastic song. One is the music, it's so alive and it's so like wild and amazing. It was a lot of the inspiration. Did you take a lot of inspiration from, and maybe you answered this partially before, from Spanish music? I mean, was the sort of starting point there of thinking, okay, I want to start with the inspiration and then kind of go from there? Because it has that feel, but obviously it has your own feel too. Yeah.
Well, Jeffrey Lane is the one who said, let's do, after we did Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, he said, let's do Women on the Verge. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, let's talk about this. And it took me several months, but one of the, to say yes, but one of the attractions was, you know, I'm a fan of flamenco music and Spanish music in general. I play the guitar that I play when I play guitar is often Spanish, you know, it's often flamenco-y stuff.
Yeah.
You could see my hand went to an A minor as soon as I was saying that. And I wrote like at least half of that score I wrote on guitar.
Wow.
So
with this song,
there was an attraction there, but really when I started thinking about Almodovar's movies and the mission in that musical, I felt, and Jeffrey did too, was can we make a musical, a stage musical that feels like it's part of the Almodovar universe? Almodovar is one of those people who's a genre onto himself, and can we sort of fit into that rather than try to, you know, like, let's try to sound like we belong there. And he worked with us a lot. It was really lovely to collaborate with him as well. And one of the things that his movies is that sticks out is the score. The scores are amazing, and he has that amazing composer, Iglesias. I can't remember his first name, but he also uses Spanish language music from all over the world. So this is what I'm getting to here. So my music tends to be very heavily groove oriented. Often doesn't have to be, but there's always at least two percussionists in the pit in my show.
I was going to say percussive. It always feels
and
percussive.
in my band, you know, I have one of the great percussionists in New York City who plays with us. We're sort of honored. Javier Diaz, a conguero, you know, but a guy who knows all different Latin and non-Latin grooves. But my point being, what you just heard, weirdly, is actually a samba groove, which is from Brazil. But I felt like, oh no, this is celebratory. It's rhythmic, and somehow it works for Almodovar's universe.
And what about lyrics? Like when you're writing lyrics, because again, you were talking about that percussive thing you have, and sometimes when I listen to your lyrics, there's a sort of like, I don't know anything because I've never done it. Does all that stuff influence how you write the lyrics? I mean, obviously a certain amount of the music inspires, but talk about your lyric writing and how that operates, or how you think about that.
Well, it operates in many, many different ways. That's the thing. Like sometimes a phrase will come that feels rhythmically really interesting. Yeah. And that could be the beginning of a song. That could take off the song. Other times it has more to do with melodic. And then other times there'll be a line in a script or even in a conversation that just feels like, oh, that's the crux of the matter there, intellectually or, you know, emotionally. So the thing that I get in trouble with sometimes is when I sing my demos, I'm a pianist who plays like, this is what drummers and percussionists tell me. I'm a pianist who plays like a percussionist. Right. You know, like I'm a frustrated conga player. You know, I took bongo lessons when I was in college. Like, I wish I could be a good drummer and a good percussionist. For me, it's mostly exercise. You know, it's just like, it's therapy. But when I play the piano, there's a lot of rhythmic stuff going on. Like in that song, there was all kinds of, I mean, I'm not aware of it because it's different every time I play it, but I think I was doing, you know, like triplets over things and, you know, stuff that you would do as a hand drummer. So when I'm singing a demo, often what will sound right to me will be some kind of weird triplets that fall in a certain way, or a way to extend a note, or sort of channeling my favorite singers in different milieus, like, you know, whether it's like Andy Partridge from XTC or Beefheart or Billie Holiday, you know, like these things just seep in, and you end up doing things rhythmically that then you have to explain to a singer who has their own set of influences, what you meant by it, or how to do it, or whether they can do their own thing with it. Right. Makes sense?
So yes, it does make sense. And that, yeah, because it feels like a lot of the stuff you look at, like, is it rhythmic phrasing too? Like how the phrase, because I mean, I love your lyrics. The other question I had is, in terms of lyric writing, you know, because you talk about playwriting, when we talk about playwriting, sometimes it's the idea of lose the exposition, less is more, how do we keep to the conflict? When you're talking about lyric writing, are there things like that of don't explain too much, or are there rules that you try to follow, or you just go with your instincts?
That's interesting. You find that just like in the macro sense, when you're looking at a show, let's say, you are sort of trying to figure out in the first months or more, or whatever, you're trying to figure out what's the tone of the show. Yeah. Meaning everything from what's the pacing of the plot and the scenes, character development, what's the tone of this show? And then you just it keeps getting whittled down. Like, what's the first act? What's the second act? What's this scene? What's that scene? What is this song? What is that song? And rules tend to suggest themselves. For me, it's often subtractive. It's often rules suggest themselves after I've done the wrong thing, you know, after I've made a mistake. So you make sometimes not that many mistakes, sometimes a lot of mistakes, and it's sort of, that's what whittles the wood into the right thing. Right. In terms of lyrics, though, you know, I have this discussion a lot with people who are songwriters who want to write, who are established really good songwriters in the pop field or rock or whatever, who want to write for musicals, it's usually a different thing. You have to tell your story or get your character through some development or justify why you're stopping for this song, or write a song that doesn't feel like you're stopping. And you can't rely on the same tools that you might rely on if you're recording an album for, an audio audience, like repetition, certain types of repetition,
Right.
certain sneaky ways of putting in ear candy. It becomes a different set of rules, but every song has its own rules.
Yeah, which is it seems to me kind of a nice segue into the band's visit, because when you guys first started talking to us at the Atlantic and me at the Atlantic, and you and Oren and Itamar came and talked about what that was, and I looked at the film. I'd never seen the film before, and it's such a unexpected, fragile, very human story that as a story, even in film form, doesn't serve itself up. It's sort of, you're sitting there and it kind of reveals itself to you along the way. So the question, of course, you're looking at it going, how the hell is this going to be a musical? And speaking of your question, your thing about tone, it felt like somehow you came up with a new set of rules for that. I don't know, there was something about the songs in that where they felt like tonal, but they also became very essential story-wise. And there was something about the merging of those two things. And I don't know, did you think about, with that musical in particular, I suppose it dictated, like you said, its own tone, but talk about that process.
That had its own, the reason why should it be a musical, that question that one asks. And it's usually, you go on instinct at first, and then you, like I said, it's like you often will find your answers are don't do that as opposed to do that. And that helps guide you onto the right track. So I remember watching the movie after being presented with the idea and, knowing, I've been a lover of what they call Oriental music, which is basically classical Middle Eastern music, but it's also pop Middle Eastern music from a certain era. Since I was a little kid when my dad took me to Lebanon, and I actually heard this music for the first time on the radio. And
because your dad is Lebanese, right?
So the musical aspect of it, I knew I would enjoy falling into, and I would enjoy sort of learning more about, and be challenged by it in a good way. The storyline is very simple and very quiet and beautiful and somehow heartbreaking. And I watched this movie, and by the end, I just felt like, wow, this is such a masterful piece, because it touches you so deeply and has such a light touch. And then the biggest challenge came in my mind, which was, holy cow, if you could do that in a musical, because musical theater doesn't have to be, but often is this medium where you just throw neon colored, turds at an audience and let them explode in their faces. If comedy is one thing, you deliver it the right way, but sort of a lot of the currency of musical theater that I don't like is that stuff that's the jazz handsy kind of, bright kind of stuff. So can you engage an audience? Can you engage a musical theater audience with something that plumbs depths? How do you do that? And that's what we were exploring. And I think what we ended up coming up with, because Itamar and I, we were on the same page almost immediately, was that I could write, for this show, I could write a bunch of songs that were much more poetic than they normally could be. We could use the songs and the lyrics in the songs to get us deep into moments where the character is connecting, and also into moments where an audience can feel really connected with these characters, this story, us who were writing it and each other.
Yeah.
We knew that from early on. We didn't know we could do it, and we weren't sure. But once we had a pretty good idea we were doing it right, and then when David Cromer came on the project, who was the perfect director, it was like we all had the same mission, and mission I think was accomplished.
Yeah. Totally. And actually, as you're talking, I'm thinking it's that amazing balance between a song that is poetic, yet weirdly ends up feeling not poetry for poetry's sake, completely essential to the story. The marrying of those two is kind of great. So talk about this next song that you're going to play from the band's visit, and set it up a little bit, how it came about and what it is.
Well, there's a moment in the movie and in the show, in the musical, where you have these two characters, an older Egyptian band leader, but he's the leader of this police band that's accidentally come to this small village in Israel, almost a settlement, because they're supposed to go to a larger city, but it has a similar name. Anyway, there he is in this village, and then this sort of beautiful, soulful, but somewhat damaged middle-aged woman, and has decided to welcome them in, help them find places to stay, and has kind of tried to connect with him. So they're eating dinner together in a restaurant at a table, and she mentions that she loves Kulthum, who is the greatest singer of that type of music who ever lived, and was as popular or more so than Frank Sinatra when they were both alive. He says, "No, you don't know Kulthum." She's like, "What do you mean?" And then she starts actually quoting. So she talks about how it was in her younger days in Israel, there wasn't culture. There wasn't deep culture yet. So they would listen to what was coming in from Egypt over the radio and over black and white television to get their culture, and it's the essence of romance for her.
Right.
Does that?
That does, yeah, because there is something about the sort of talking about love or talking about romance in that scene that's beautiful. Yeah, great. Let's hear it.
Let me.
Or if there's anything else you want to say about it before you play it, but that's
just bear with me.
Okay.
Kulthum and Omar Sharif came floating on a jasmine wind from the west, from the south, honey in my ears, spice in my mouth, dark and thrilling, strange and sweet, Cleopatra and a handsome thief, and they floated in on a jasmine wind, Kulthum and Omar Sharif, and they floated in on a jasmine wind, Kulthum and Omar Sharif. Friday evenings, Omar Sharif, in black and my mother and I would sit there in a trance. He was schooled to the marrow, the pharaoh of romance. Sunday mornings would come too. Her voice would fill our living room. The ship from Egypt always came sailing in on radio waves, and the jasmine wind, deep perfume, uncle too. And the living room becomes the garden, and the TV set becomes the fountain, and the music grows in the garden, and everything flows. Uncle Tomb and little Marjorie came floating on a lemon leaf, flying in on a jasmine wind. Uncle Tomb and Omar Sharif, and we danced with them in a jasmine-scented wind. Uncle Tomb and Omar Sharif.
Awesome. Awesome. Hey, that's such a beautiful, amazing song. As I was listening to it, I wondered.
Trina Lenk sings it. It's a lot better than the way I sing it.
No, but it was great to hear it again. There's something about that. Tell me if this is the right word. The bridge and the living room. That part. There's something about. I mean, I remember it on stage. I think about it musically, but also it feels so almost theatrical and cinematic that the world just kind of opens up musically. How did that come about? That you're like, oh, the bridge should go here because it's such a. The song has such a beautiful circular thing, and then all of a sudden it just goes. It kind of.
One of the things I've learned from doing musical theater for so long now is to think visually, which is not easy for me. And while I was writing the song, I actually was, I was imagining large stage tricks so that it really all happened. But I realized that, if you put it in the lyrics, you could do more subtle stuff that ended up our design team and Cromer ended up really servicing nicely, where the lyrics sort of tell you about what's happening, and then you, like with everything with this show, tonally, you can't open the throttle up too much. It doesn't work for this piece. So let the lyrics paint the picture, and then open it up just enough so that there's, the subtlest choreography, almost, very little, but it kills you for some reason. Yeah. So I knew that bridge, and I got the melody first. There's something about that it just sort of sounds like opening up a fantasy.
It does, and when you come back to the whether it's the chorus or the verse, is there a key change after it? Or
there's a modulation that comes out of nowhere, which I I was really excited about. Goes because you don't really know where you've landed up, and the music flows in the garden, and everything grows, and you think you're going to go back to boom, cool too. You don't even think it. You don't know where you are, but because she goes, everything grows. And then there's this pause, and then it's just right into. So you feel like I hope you feel like something has happened to the man listening to her. There's
Yeah.
something shifted in the man listening to her, something shifted in her, and something's hopefully shifted in the audience that will inspire them to buy merchandise at full price. Sorry.
On that note, you guys, it's
Yeah.
Annie. I was just gonna hop in and open it
question
up to
time?
some questions if you were game.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to
I've
say,
been looking forward to this.
yeah, let's do the question. But I still
Pick the
wanted to say
hardest ones for you.
one more thing, which I find remarkable about that song before we do, is as you were talking, I do feel like it captures that thing when two people, whether they're falling in love, when they start to connect and things expand. It's just like you were saying. I think it does that beautifully. So it's
It's about expanding and deepening.
yeah,
There's a verticality to it too.
totally. What's the first question, Annie?
So we had great questions, many of which you already answered, but here's one. Is there an existing musical out there that you wish you had the first crack at, that you wish you could have written?
Oh my God. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with the quality of it. It's just, I wish that someone had, I guess nobody knew who I was at the time, but I would have loved to have written Seussical. Like, I feel like I know exactly musically what I would do with Dr. Seuss, having grown up. It's one of my major influences is Dr. Seuss. So does that answer that? Maybe.
That's great. That's perfect.
Good. Yeah.
I think we may just do one more before we wrap, which is there any source material, and you don't have to name names if you don't want to, that you think is impossible to make a successful musical out of?
Oh yeah. And it's I mean, there's a lot of source material that's impossible to make a good musical out of, and even more to make a successful musical out of, because there are plenty of bad successful musicals as there are bad successful everything. Of course, again, it's all personal taste, but it's very interesting when I teach master classes to hear what people are working on, and I'll hear a song that's really good but makes no sense and doesn't do anything, and it's because the source material that it's based on is just doesn't sing and shouldn't sing. You should not make a musical out of 2001: A Space Odyssey. You shouldn't make a musical, I mean, there's a million examples. So
We could probably, because we can go until 5, right? We're still 4:54. You want to do a couple more, Annie?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I could also sing another song if the audio is okay at the very end, if you want.
Yeah, sing a song at the end, right?
I feel like maybe we do. I don't think we have to take a vote for that. I feel like people would love to hear another song. So let's do that and then wrap up. How's that sound? Claire, does that sound good to you?
I would always take more David Yazbeck songs.
Yes,
Let's do it.
let's hear it, please.
Let's do it.
So
Encore.
Neil, I'll do a song. You asked me yesterday, can you do something from your albums? And
Great.
I haven't made a new album in a while. This is from the last one. Oh, no. I have not recorded this song yet. This will be on my next album, whenever that happens.
Great.
But fans of Tootsie will recognize a rhyme in here, like a joke rhyme that I then used in Tootsie, that I'm going to take back and use in this. This is a song about leading an empty life.
He said he saw it in a painting. He said he saw it and it lit up his soul. Now he told him that it's all he wants. He got, but I don't believe it. Now he's going to a disco, gonna find a girl to fill up this hole. Now he's saying that it's all he wants. She got, but I don't believe it. And when you think you're winning, it isn't over till it's over, and then you pitch another inning. Set the wheel spinning again and again. You'll suffer. It's okay because you're never alone. Now it's going to connect. But I don't believe it. Eckhart Tolle, he's eating the menu, brother. It's okay because he's never alone. Now he's going to connect, 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 connect. But I don't believe it. Now he's going to connect, 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 connect. But I don't believe it. And now he's going to connect, 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 connect. But I don't believe it.
Yeah. Awesome. 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 Hey, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure talking to you. And actually, even though we've known each other a long time, I feel like there's things I learned about you today that I never knew about. And also just to talk about your process has been really, really exciting. So thanks for taking the time in the midst of this strangeness societal strangeness that's going on right now with this COVID. But it's such a pleasure. And
Thank you, Neil.
yes, and also
Atlantic Theater, worth supporting.
thank you, David. And
They have some
thank
great
you.
stuff up their sleeves coming up.
Yes,
We're all
lots
happy.
of stuff. And thank you so much to everybody who's supported us, who's friends of the Atlantic. There'll be lots more to come, and hopefully lots more to come with David Yazbeck in the future.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and thanks for tuning in, and there will be more to come next week.
Yeah, this has been awesome. David, thank you so much. I'm really glad you played that last song, so hooray.
Is there still an audience out there?
We still have an audience.
Yeah.
I'll keep playing the piano till you cut out.
Well, listen, while he plays, I'll just say I've added a link in the chat, and these are very strange times, and the only thing we have is this and each other. So spending these moments with you is always a joy. If you're moved, if you've been inspired, we hope that you will consider donating.
Yeah, rock and roll. Thank you, everybody. We will see you all soon. Thank you, Claire, and
Yeah,
thank you, David.
Thank you, Neil, and see you guys back here next Friday at 4 p.m. live with Atlantic every week. And thanks for joining. Have a great weekend. Be well.
Thanks so much.